Okay, I'm getting the thumbs up that we're on air. It's good to see everybody. Welcome to our class on Luke, whether you're here in the auditorium or joining us online. I assume we've got the wide angle on so I can wander around a little bit. Appreciate that. We got us a little gallery going on back here. That's kind of a cool thing. I kind of like that. We're in Luke, the 11th chapter. Really, I appreciate you guys showing up week after week and making comments, and you said some encouraging things to me. I appreciate that. You may regret it because you kind of egged me on, but I've enjoyed this class. I think I said this at the beginning of the class, but back when I started looking at Luke, we did it in our small group, and I wanted us to go through a gospel, and I had a book in mind that I had read that I wanted to use kind of as a a main resource to guide the discussions. And so I said, well, let's do Luke, because I thought this book was on Luke. And so I sat down to prepare the first lesson, and the book was on Mark. So we're actually doing this book kind of by mistake. But it's been good. It's probably been the most detailed look I've ever done on the Gospel of Luke, and have come to appreciate it more as a result. To sort of catch us up tonight to where we finished up last week, Jesus went to breakfast, was invited over for breakfast by a Pharisee, and there's obviously a contingent of Pharisees and experts in the law there. And this is right on the heels of Jesus kind of cleaning their clock on the accusations that had been made about that he was casting out demons by the power of the devil. And them, after seeing all the things that he's done, daring to ask him for a sign from heaven, like, you're not doing enough, show us something else. And so he goes over and gets into discussion with the Pharisees on the basis of them criticizing him for not following their tradition of the ritual washing that he did before the dinner. And so he's playing with them. He says, woe to you, and gives them three woes of ways that they're falling short as supposed religious leaders of Israel. And as we finished up last week in verse 45, one of the experts in the law said, "Teacher, when you say these things, you insult us." And Jesus doesn't go, well, don't take it so bad. Oh, yeah, I wasn't including you guys. He says, well, you guys got problems too. And he points out three areas in which these guys have fallen short. And I forget how much time we spent on what he said about the Pharisees last week. We'll probably spend a little more time on what he says to these guys, because frankly, in a lot of ways, if we're not careful, I think we're more in danger of falling into some of the weaknesses that these guys had than we are the Pharisees. We do come out of sort of a fairly legalistic legacy, and we got to watch out for, our traditions. But the experts in the law are the folks that have studied, formal study, spent lots and lots of time studying the law, and were looked to by the people as, well, how does the law apply to this situation? And the reality is, this audience here, your biblical IQ is, regardless of how well you think about your own personal study, because of the teaching and the preaching and the emphasis that we have here on Bible study, you guys know a lot more about the Bible and what it actually says than most of the people that you encounter. And so I think the warnings that he gives to these guys, I don't think you're as smart as you think you are. Maybe we ought to pay a little bit of attention to them and make sure that we avoid some of the pitfalls and the traps that they've fallen into. And he has three criticisms for them. Let's read through them, and then I'd like to take them one at a time. Jesus replied, after he said that you insult us, Jesus replied, and you experts in the law, woe to you, because you load people down with burdens they can hardly carry, and you yourselves will not lift one finger to help them. Woe to you, because you build tombs for the prophets, and it was your forefathers who killed them. So you testify you approve of what your forefathers did. They killed the prophets, and you build their tombs. Because of this, God in his wisdom said, I will send them prophets and apostles, some of whom they will kill, and others they will persecute. Therefore, this generation will be held responsible for the blood of all the prophets that have been shed from the beginning of the world, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who was killed between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell you, this generation will be held responsible for it all. Woe to you, experts in the law, because you've taken away the key to knowledge. You yourselves have not entered, and you have hindered those who were entering. Okay, let's take these one at a time. First is you have placed burdens on people, and you won't even lift a finger to help them. How would these guys put burdens on people? Talked a little bit about it last week. I think you got one person who was awake last week.
By creating arbitrary laws that weren't originally given to them, that are unnecessary and only serve to bog people down.
Okay, in some ways, in some instances, the applications they came up for applying the law gave excuses and made it easier for them to get away with stuff. In other cases, it was to make it more restrictive even than what the law had done. And the impact of that was, rather than being experts in the law to help people understand the law, to bring them closer to God, the effect was, man, they made it so hard nobody can keep this thing. Made it harder, discouraged people. How can we do that today? Can you think of an example, James?
Just like tightening up the belt.
Okay,
cutting
tightening up the belt.
Fat off the back.
Okay. Can you think of a way that we might make things tougher, Mike?
I think we can kind of focus on the rules versus the faith.
Okay.
You know, because a faithful person is not above sinning.
Okay.
But if we hammer on the rules, it's, again, there's no grace. It's
Okay. Focus on the rules. Also focus on what? Harry, what you got?
Isn't there a situation where the people's money was not clean, so they had to change it for temple's money? Because I was always thinking there's got to be money involved. Either they're burdening with the money somehow.
Okay. So certainly they did that. I'm not sure the experts in the law were involved in that. When Jesus gets to Jerusalem, we'll talk about that specific and what was going on. But yes, in fact, they made it financially more difficult for people. Okay. Chris.
Well, I'm trying to think of a modern day example of how we would do that. And we preach against abortion.
Okay.
That abortion is bad, and you shouldn't do it because they're killing innocent babies and so forth. But how many of us actually support the women that are in situations that are trapped and made mistakes and in sin and stuff? And what do we do to help them not choose an abortion?
Okay.
How do we support them so that doesn't happen?
Okay. I think that's a good example. That maybe goes to what Jesus says. You don't list, you criticize and you condemn, but you don't lift a finger to help. Yes.
I was thinking more of the lines of making good ideas kind of legalistic, like.
Bingo.
Like,
Okay.
we might create multiple times a week to get together and fellowship and Bible study, and then someone comes along that's new and is not used to it, and we tell them, you absolutely have to go to all of this or you're not spiritual.
Okay. Okay. Again, the experts in the law were guilty of making up rules that went beyond what the law said and binding them on people. Mike?
I just thought of an old time with this old church one that I heard a lot when I was a new Christian. You know, we bound rules on people by saying we must have an orderly worship.
Okay.
You know, that meant you had to wear a coat and tie. You had to, you know, women had to wear dresses. Whatever the thing was. That's we took a scripture and just tied ourselves up in it. You know.
We create tradition. We take traditions and customs and turn them into rules. Okay. Yes, Irene.
And sometimes it's arbitrary. For example, in my case, if you say worship is at 8:30 in the morning on Sunday morning, that's really difficult for me to make.
Okay.
All right, and it's not just because I'm lazy or this or that. So when things are changed, or sometimes it's arbitrary. It's roadblocks.
Okay. And that word roadblock is a good one. Make it more difficult by just the way we treat people, what we expect of them, how we maybe look at them and expect them to behave in a certain way. That's beyond, I'm not minimizing doctrine here, okay? Without minimizing doctrine at all, we need to be careful that we're not like the experts in the law and we make it harder for people to come, to feel welcome, to have any interest in studying what the scriptures say. And we should take this warning. Jesus didn't just say, you know, you guys just tone it down a little bit. He said, woe to you. You guys are in trouble. And so I think it's good for us to think about how it is that we interact with people. Do we make it easier or harder for them to be interested in spiritual things? Or maybe we so legalistic and so, you know, into our traditions and ways, it's like, I don't want to be anything like that, okay? These guys actually had a position of authority. They could demand stuff. They could demand people to stand up and, you know, bow to them and greet them with flowery terms of respect. They had gone, I think, to the far degree, and Jesus says, "You guys you're laying burdens on people. You're not there helping them get closer to God. You're laying burdens on them." And then he said, the next thing that he gets into is he says, "You build tombs for the prophets, yet it was your forefathers who killed them." And he goes on for several verses, and I've always had a hard time understanding these verses, because when I thought about who was it that was killing the prophets, I always associated that with, you know, times when folks were carried off into captivity, you know, and that it was foreign folks coming inside that were killing people and dragging people off. And that's not what Jesus is talking about. Okay? What is this building tombs, but your forefathers killed the prophets? What's his point? What do you think the meaning is there? If you're in a position of authority, whether it's the Pharisees and their ascribed leadership, or you've established yourself as a biblical scholar, what's one of the things that you might point to about how you got where you got? That may not be a very clear question. So, James?
You got to climb the ladder sooner or later.
Okay, you got to climb the ladder. All
and
right.
You got to climb the mountain sooner or later.
Okay,
You
but
know.
you might get to that mountain with some help, right? Back there, and you got to speak in English. Okay, no Spanish.
I'm glad you reminded me. Yes, you go back to Moses when
Okay.
he went up to receive the commandments.
Okay.
And as soon as he left, they went back to
Okay.
serving those idol gods.
Okay.
And that has been the pattern of Israel all the way up until the last kingdom was destroyed.
Okay.
God's prophet would come, he would give them the message, they would obey, but then they would turn from God, they go into captivity, and there was just a complete cycle to where they didn't listen to God, and they killed they themselves killed some of the prophets. Some of the kings did not even want to listen to the prophets, and they said, I have my own, and I'll listen to them.
Okay.
And this is part of what Jesus is referring to. Like, you guys have done this historically.
Okay. All right. Set what he said over here, because that's like half of it. But add to it, think about it, maybe it's clearer this way. If you were a priest, how did you become a priest? Because you did good on your PATs, your priest aptitude tests? You know, you decided you wanted. Is that how you became a priest? What did you have to have in order to become a priest? What's that? You had to be of the tribe of Levi. Okay? You had a long lineage behind you, and in those days they had the records, and you could trace your father and his father and his father all the way back to Aaron. In the same way, the experts in the law likewise, really just about every strata of this society traced and got their authority and got their importance from where they had come from, who they were kin to, and how they got there. And so on the one hand, you had them immensely proud of that. If you were a priest and you could trace your lineage all the way back to Aaron, you could brag about that. But when you got honest and started looking at what had happened, at what even the priest had done, okay, they had turned from God, not listened, rebelled, and in some cases, actually, the ones who tried to do what was right got killed for it. And what do we do with the dead that we want to honor? We build them memorials. We build them tombs. So on the one hand, they had a past that if they really looked at it, there was an awful lot of bad stuff there. But they took pride in that past, and they built monuments that on one level honored who had gone before, but on another level helped provide the sort of background and substance to who you were and how you were important. And so Jesus points this out, and he uses it's interesting the examples that he uses. He says, from Abel to Zechariah. Okay, I don't speak Hebrew, I don't know the Hebrew alphabet, but I doubt that Abel and Zechariah start with the beginning and the ending letters of the alphabet. It's just a bonus. It's a bonus we get in English, that from A to Z, from Abel to Zechariah, we got it. In their mind, Abel was the first godly man to be killed, to be murdered. And Zechariah in 2 Chronicles, because of the way the Hebrew Bible was set up, was the last priest to be killed. And so there is this essence of Jesus saying, you know, from beginning, don't just talk about one section of your history and say, well, yeah, we were bad there. It's from Abel to Zechariah, you guys, your past. There's blood there, and you're going to be held responsible for it, which we'll talk about in a minute. Abel, of course, we know, offered a better sacrifice and was killed by Cain. Did anybody go to Chronicles and read about Zechariah? I in error told you that last week that it was in 1 Chronicles, and I caught a bunch of you before you left. It's actually in 2 Chronicles. Did you ever read that? it was really, really interesting. Turn over to 2 Chronicles chapter 24. And I think this maybe will fit really well when you think about this. Kind of comes on the heels of the time of Jezebel and Ahab, okay, and our Elijah study. And unfortunately, I think Jezebel and Ahab, because they're so notorious and because of the connection with Elijah, we just think there's not anybody else like them, that they were the worst of the worst. But I got to tell you, in chapter 22, verse 10, Athaliah, okay, who is the mother of Ahaziah and some other folks, she gives Jezebel every bit of a run for her money. Evil, evil woman. So much so that there's a priest, Jehoiada, who has to act because things are just, everything that Elijah had been able to help put back into place, this lady had undone. They had raided the temple and took all the stuff out of the temple and were using it in Baal worship. Okay? And this guy Jehoiada, he managed to kind of run a revolt and eventually get this lady killed and just out of the way because she was just absolute power broker that controlled everything and who was on the throne. And shortly thereafter, beginning in chapter 24, we have Joash. And Joash is the one, if you came to Sunday school as a kid, you went home with little papers about how the little boy that he became king when he was 7 years old. Okay? Put there on the throne by Jehoiada, who arranged it. And it's interesting what it says about him, because in all these kings it says they did good or they did evil all the days of their life. That's not quite what it says about Joash. Joash, verse 1, was 7 years old when he became king and reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. His mother's name was Zibiah. She was from Beersheba. Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord all the years of Jehoiada the priest. And he had sons and daughters. Jehoiada chose 2 wives for him. He had sons and daughters. Okay? In fact, while Jehoiada was alive, he rebuilds the temple. He restores the temple, gets rid of the Baal worship, and things are going fine. Jehoiada dies. Okay, we're not going to read all the verses, but Jehoiada dies, and thereafter the priests draw him away, and they start doing Baal worship all over again. Okay? And so, look over in verse 15. Now Jehoiada was old and full of years, and he died at the age of 130. He was buried with the kings in the city of David because of the good he had done in Israel for God in his temple. Okay. After the death of Jehoiada, the officials of Judah came and paid homage to the king, and he listened to them. They abandoned the temple of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and worshipped Ashereth poles and idols. And because of their guilt, God's anger came upon Judah and Jerusalem. Although the Lord sent prophets to the people to bring them back to him, and though they testified against them, they would not listen. Exactly what's going on with Jesus and the religious leaders now. They don't recognize him for who he is. They don't want to listen to him. We've got it figured out, and we know what to do. Same bunch of folks. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon Zechariah. And here's the Zechariah that comes into play. There are some folks that try to say that when Jesus is talking about Zechariah, he's talking about John the Baptist's father. But in the context of them killing the priests, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Because Zechariah stands up and confronts these guys that what you guys are doing is wrong. What happens to Zechariah? They kill him. Not only do they kill him in the temple grounds. Okay, yeah, king went along with it, but this is not just the king. He's been drawn aside by the folks who are supposed to be staying faithful to God, and they kill Zechariah in the temple grounds. Come over to Jesus. The religious leaders are not wanting to do what's right. Jesus is telling them you're doing wrong, and what's going to happen when he gets to Jerusalem? They're going to turn him over for crucifixion. Okay? So there's a little bit of prophecy going on here, and Jesus is drawing some parallels that they maybe don't quite realize yet, but it's, you guys have killed these guys from Abel to Zechariah, and yet you build tombs and you want to take honor from these guys that your forefathers killed. You're drawing your honor from that. But then he goes on to say that you guys are going to be held responsible for this. So how can that be? Okay, we're all familiar with, I think it's Ezekiel, where it says, the soul that sins shall die, the son shall not bear the sin of the father shall not bear the sin of the son, and, you know, this principle that, you know, the soul that sins shall die. These guys didn't kill those prophets, and here is Jesus. So let's go back to Luke chapter 11. And he says, verse 50, therefore this generation will be held responsible for the blood of all the prophets that's been shed since the beginning of the world, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who was killed between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell you this generation will be held responsible for it all. How can that be? What is Jesus saying? Mike?
I would assume he's saying you're doing the same thing that they were
Okay.
doing. You're
That's what
ignoring
and
the prophet.
I'm coming to this topic. I don't know that I know the complete answer here, but I think that makes sense to me. It's
Yeah.
you guys are you guys are going to be the culmination of it. You guys have honored these guys that have done that stuff, and you're going to turn around and you're going to kill the Messiah. You're going to be responsible for that. Yeah, back in the back.
Yeah, just what was just said. Jesus is that prophet that was told that would come. And he is the final prophet. And they are about to do the same thing that had been done up to this point. And they will be the ones that will be guilty.
Okay.
And he was letting them know that you're going to do the same thing.
Okay. Yeah. You are falsely deriving your honor from your forefathers who killed the prophets. That's where you're getting your honor from. Those are the kinds of folks you're getting your honor from. And you're going to turn around and do the same thing. Yes, sir.
I believe there's a verse that says that those that are teachers hold a higher responsibility.
We're told that.
Correct. And so he's telling these prophets that you're basically the teachers and you bear a higher responsibility. So just like their forefathers, they are responsible. They have a higher responsibility, so they are going to bear the burden of a higher penalty.
Okay. And that takes us perfectly into the third thing that he says. Woe to you, experts in the law, because you've taken away the key to knowledge. You yourselves have not entered, and you've hindered those who were entering. What's the key to knowledge? He says, you've taken away the key. What's the key? The key to knowledge that they've taken away. Chris.
Well, ultimately, it's the Messiah, because Jesus said, you know, my words, I don't speak my words, I speak the words of the Father. And they were taking away the access to the Messiah because they were denying who he was.
Okay.
So I think that's kind of the ultimate example of it. But another way to look at it is, maybe this is a modern day way of thinking, but lawyers can really mess up the law for what makes sense.
Okay.
If you've ever had any legal, if you've ever had any legal action, you need a lawyer because it doesn't make sense. It's like, why would they write a law like that? Oh, but you've got to know that there's 4 dozen laws that that actually negate what makes the most sense, and now you've got to jump through these hoops. I mean, that's our modern version, but that happened in the Old Testament. They couldn't follow the law that God made because it was so clouded by all of these man-made rules and regulations all around it.
Okay. I'm sort of watching Renee to see if she's going to demand rebuttal. So here's maybe something similar, okay, but not in the realm of the law, but in the realm of religion and the Bible. I mean, it's not that uncommon for us to meet people today who say, well, I tried reading the Bible. It's just too hard, okay? And we're within just a few generations of organized religion having taken steps to keep the Scriptures from people, okay? That what you need is you need theological experts to explain to you what the Scriptures say. You don't need to be reading the Scripture. You need to talk to the experts, and they need to tell you. We're not that far removed from that. Okay? In fact, the whole Reformation was about denying people access to the Scriptures in many ways. That's what these guys were doing. In their puffed up sense of self-importance and their study and their intellectual, we know the law, you need to listen to us, and here's how you apply that law, they had made it impossible for people to understand the important things like justice and mercy and heart for God. And ultimately, as I think it was Chris or somebody said, caused them not to recognize the Messiah when he was right in front of them. They didn't need more signs. There were plenty of signs, not to mention the teaching and the life that he was living. And he says, the ultimate outcome of you guys and all of your effort and all of your study is you're keeping people away. You're not drawing them to God. You're keeping them away. It'd be nice to know how that breakfast ended. Did people slip out, or did it, was it, oh, well, we're going to stop here for now, we got it. It'd be interesting to know how that ended. But we do know what happened right after, because read verse 53. When Jesus left there, the Pharisees and teachers of the law began to oppose him fiercely and to besiege him with questions, waiting to catch him in something he might say. We've already seen several instances of the criticism of some of the questions that they've asked and their opposition to him. But it appears that Luke is saying here, it ramped up after this. It's like, okay, he's not going to work with us. He's not going to come on over and see our way of doing things. We're going to oppose him fiercely, and we need to go after him. We need to just pepper him with questions. And I guess the image I have is of somebody who holds a press conference. At the end of the press conference, he's walking away, and all the reporters are shouting questions, and not polite questions, but demanding, well, why don't you tell us about this? And what about that? And so as Jesus is going to Jerusalem, two things are happening. They're besieging him with questions. The opposition is growing, but so are the crowds. We're going to see that verse 1 of chapter 12, meanwhile, a crowd of many thousands had gathered, so they were trampling on one another. I've tried to picture this in my mind, and I don't know that I've ever pictured Jesus going to Jerusalem drawing thousands of people. Maybe a few hundred. I've kind of pictured, maybe a couple of hundred, because after all, everybody's got to work, They got things to do and they got responsibilities. But as Jesus is heading to Jerusalem, it says there are thousands. It said so much so that they're trampling over. Why were they trampling over each other? One, because there was a lot of them, but what were they wanting?
he was on the road to Damascus, and he was on his way up.
On the road to Jerusalem.
He was on his way up there to let everybody know, I'm the sacrificial lamb.
Okay.
And I was out to give everybody freedom.
Okay. So they're excited about the fact that, you know, this may be the Messiah, this may be it. But they're trying to do something. What are they trying to do? Mike?
Well, I think they're trying to touch him. They're trying to get
Trying to
close
touch him. Okay? This is not a, you know, concert at the stadium with the jumbotrons, you know, and the giant things as speakers where, you know, every little whisper that he says can be heard by everybody. This is Jesus traveling, sitting and teaching, thousands of people, no microphones, no speakers. Oh, we want to hear.
Yeah.
We want to see. Maybe he's going to heal somebody. We want to see. And so they're crowding around.
And I was going to finish that though. Do you think he drew a lot of people when he was healing and all this stuff, and now he's been really shutting down the Pharisees?
Okay.
And the crowds sound like they could be bigger.
Okay.
Because they want to see who's this that's shutting these guys down that have been,
Okay.
you know, lording it over them.
All of that stuff's going on. Renee?
That's what I was going to say. Jesus had a reputation of doing things for people, feeding people and healing people. So that draw was there as well.
Okay, good. We're going to see chapter 12 and chapter 13. You know, Luke seems to go back and forth between presenting us with a series of events and conversations and encounters with folks. And then from time to time, he steps over to the side and he'll give us long passages of here's what Jesus was teaching and saying when he wasn't dealing directly one-on-one with folks. In chapter 12 and chapter 13, we have another one of those sections, but it starts, interestingly, by saying that Jesus began to speak first to his disciples. And as we go through here, even on into Jerusalem, we're going to stop from time to time and ask the question, who is Jesus talking to here? And it kind of makes a difference in some cases. But what the dynamic that I think is going on is they're in the midst of all of this hubbub, all of these people, and Jesus is besides teaching and getting to Jerusalem, he's trying to prepare his disciples as well. And so there are times when he doesn't pull them off and say, come over here, I want to tell you something. I don't want anybody else to hear it. Okay, and I bet I walked off the camera there. There are times when right there with the ones who can get in close and can hear, and including critics, he's really addressing he's not, you know, let me tell you this, you know, and speaking at the top of his voice and yelling. It's, guys, I need to tell you something, okay? You guys need to think about where we've been, where we're going. I need to tell you something. And so he'll then have teaching that folks will hear and that apply to them, but it's directed primarily at his disciples. And so let's read a little bit of that. We'll get into a little bit of it tonight and pick some up on it next week. He says, be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. There's nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What you've said in the dark will be heard in the daylight, and what you've whispered in the ear of inner rooms will be proclaimed from the roofs. So they've just come from a series of criticisms and getting right in the face of the Pharisees about things that they're doing wrong, and the experts in the law. They've left there. People are crowding around. What's going to happen next? Guys, let me tell you. You guys watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees. Think back to what we've just been through. You watch out for what does he mean, the yeast of the Pharisees? The bread wasn't good? Okay. We're not going back there to eat because, you know, we didn't like the food that much. He said, no, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees. Got any bread makers in here? Or Mike, what you got?
Well, I'm not a bread maker, but I mean, I think that you put a little bit of yeast in something,
Okay.
and the longer it's there, it keeps like bubbling up and
Okay.
expanding and kind of,
Okay.
it doesn't stay separate. It becomes the bread or whatever, or
Okay.
the dough. So if you keep listening to them, it's gonna, almost like how when we sit in front of the TV for too long or the computer.
Okay.
What used to be questionable, we just start believing it.
Okay. All right. Jesus is warning them here. This is not just, okay, those guys have missed the boat. We're not going to worry about them anymore. I've told them off. I've put them in their place. We don't have to worry about them anymore. It's no, what they're doing is affecting it's not only corrupted themselves, it's spread throughout the Pharisees and the leaders, but it's affected the people. Okay? And so you got to watch out for that because it's hypocrisy. Do you know what the word hypocrisy originally meant? Play acting. Okay? It originally didn't have a negative connotation. It was a person who played a role. Okay? And I think even has Greek roots and Greek drama and Greek play. But it came to mean folks who were playing a role and not letting you see what they were really like. He said, so beware of that. Watch out. But understand it's all going to be revealed. We're going to go to Jerusalem. I'm going to get turned over. It's going to look like they won. But make no mistake, everything that's been said in secret is going to be revealed. And you guys just need to understand that. I'm preparing you for that. Be ready for it. He says, I tell you, verse 4, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, and after that do no more. But I'll show you whom you should fear. Fear him who after killing of the body has power to throw you into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? Yet not one of them is forgotten by God. Indeed, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Don't be afraid, you're worth more than many sparrows. He's used this example of sparrows and hairs on the head earlier over in Matthew. I don't know if it's in the Sermon on the Mount exactly, but it's early on. So it's an example they've heard before. And he says, without being explicit, I'm going to Jerusalem. These guys are going to turn me over to Pilate. I'm going to be crucified. They can kill the body, but they can't do anything more. They may think that they're going to win, but they're not. And so don't be afraid of them. And he uses the example of sparrows. It's kind of interesting. In Matthew, it says, 2 sparrows are sold for a penny. Here he says, aren't 5 sparrows sold for 2 pennies? It's like if you speaking to how insignificant value was placed on the life of a sparrow. It just emphasizes that a little bit more. Where was it? The other day at the house, Tico came through cutting some trees, and we got some construction going on across the street, and something happened. We're not even sure, but all of a sudden there was just this tremendous racket of birds. The loudest racket of birds I think I've heard in my life. We just went out and looked to be mostly sparrows. Okay, we don't ever think about sparrows, and so as an example, Jesus is using God cares for that. If He cares for that, don't think He's not going to care for you. And so just a great example of contrast that he brings up there. We're gonna stop right there. We're out of time. Any questions or comments as we close out? I'm going to be out for a couple of weeks, so Tim can come in and clean up stuff while I'm gone. I was telling Teresa, I think I've left him in a good place. This is a section that I think he'll teach better than he teaches better than me anyway, but I think he'll teach this particular section very well. Let's close with a prayer. God, thank you for this evening. Thank you for being able to stop and study your word in the middle of the week, to refresh and sort of recalibrate, get refocused. Pray that you'll bless the rest of the week that comes up, our example and the situations we find ourselves in. God, as we read about the warnings in Scripture, it's easy to just look at how extreme some of the disobedience was and to be really critical of it and realize that we need to watch out as well. God, as we study your word, help us not to become satisfied that we think we know more than others, or that we take it and make up things that make it harder but for people to come to you or to follow you. Help us to be salt and light. Help us to be like what Peter teaches about making your teaching attractive, to draw people to you. Help them to understand the grace and the mercy and the forgiveness that's there. Be with us. Bless this church as we endeavor to do that. Bless us as we go home tonight, and be with us tomorrow. And we pray in your Son's